Welcome back to the second tutorial video about the key elements of the Justice Creates course. In the last session we have outlined the heart of creativity that flows through an entire course. We talked about experimenting with new things and creating an atmosphere of releasing people into what they're actually made for, being creative. Now with that atmosphere we are going right into our next topic, which is freedom and boundaries. I would like to compare the Justice Creates classroom to a boxing ring. The boxers cannot fight outside that clearly demarcated zone, and for their own protection and for that of the audience they need to obey rules. And then you have to do that to win. And there's also a referee who keeps them in check with those rules. So rules are not a restriction, but they're actually a beneficial component of the entire event. So the same applies to the creative classroom, to the Justice Creates classroom. When we set up a room, first of all, we want to make that room a welcoming and pleasant place to work in and to be creative in. It should be organized. There should be no clutter around. It should be like an art studio, a space of freedom. It needs to be well ventilated. There needs to be a sink or some sort of water access. It should be neat and well lit, and providing enough space for each participant to sit at a table. We usually cover the tables with plastic to avoid stains or damages. Part of defining that physical environment is also, of course, the time frame. So you need to allow and tell the participants, especially the adults in the adult course, that it will take about 2 hours for one particular session. And for the kids course I would allow about 90 minutes at least. Then of course you need to set out all the art materials that are needed for this particular session and advance to that, and then after you close the session you probably need to allow some time for cleanup. So you will be there for a good while. You can also have relaxing music available in the background to play while they do their art and you're not giving any instruction from the front. That can be classical or anything that you find is appropriate. So obviously there is more to the environment of the space than just a physical space. We want to have everybody in a safe and a pleasant space that is free from violence and emotional abuse. People need to be free of worries, and that way they can be creative. So to do that we of course have rules of behavior, and we give an outline of those in the first session of the course. You will see that in your manual. I'm not going to go into that now, but we basically also encourage the facilitator to give out guidance in terms of emotional safety. That means there's no ridicule, no laughter about anybody allowed in this course. We need to be very strict about that. There's no bad language allowed. Nothing that can tear down another person. Obviously there needs to be silence when the facilitator is talking or gives an instruction from the front or is leading a meditation. But talking is permitted in other times when the people are just busy doing their artwork, as long as it doesn't distract from the creative process. It may be that you have to interfere at some points with some people that are just talking and talking and talking, and that can be distractive to some people too. When it comes to the actual artwork, I have decided to do a very guided approach. I mentioned that earlier in the first video. Some may feel that this is a very stifling process when you're given a very strict series of steps that you have to accomplish to get to a certain piece of art. The kids course has usually 1 or 2 steps, and the adult course has maybe a series of steps to achieve. But in this way I find it that it's beneficial for those who are not as confident. So there's never going to be a moment where a person feels stuck, they don't know what to do. While if you give them a blank piece of paper, some may be totally overwhelmed by that. So it depends on the personality of the participants too. So you find maybe in some classrooms that everybody enjoys doing their own thing more than listening to that instruction that you give from the front. And you may adapt that according to the needs of the group. I found that at least there's one or two or a couple of people that in the room that are really benefiting from a very clear and guided outline of what you need to do first, and then the next step, and then the next step after that. It's also important that you don't make them perfect a specific art form, but you give them a guidance. So we're not here to make them professional artists and have them be perfect in a certain technique, but they are there to enjoy the process. That's really the goal. That's why also you facilitators and your helpers that are working with you need to be focused on encouragement and positive feedback throughout the course. There may be a suggestion, but it also always needs to be wrapped in some sort of encouragement and positive feedback about what they are actually doing. Show appreciation for the good attempts and focus on the positives. And do not compare, if it be ever so tempting, to compare one person's artwork to that of the neighbor and say, okay, look at him, how he's doing that. That might be something that you want to do, but I would really strongly discourage you from doing that. Just encourage each person individually and do not compare with others. It might really intimidate the people. When you read the session instructions in the manual, please always keep in mind that you don't need your students to master that particular art technique. So that's really important. Even yourself, you might find yourself trying to figure out exactly how that works beforehand, and you may do that in your own time, but don't expect the students to go along to perfection. The point is that they're inspired to be creative with whatever materials we happen to provide for them. So as it is with freedom in all areas of our society, it can only work within the clear boundaries of rules. So just as the two boxers have the freedom to plan their attack and choose their own moves, they have to stay within the boundaries of the boxing ring. That's just the way it is. If people are getting out of that set of rules, then we're bound to have problems. And you may have to expel one or two participants if they're constantly breaking rules in the classroom. So we need to make sure that the freedom of the one person does not impede on the freedom of others, just as it is with everyday life. So, the process is important, not the results. I have here a couple of examples that I want to show you how one person is different in approach as to another person. So I talked about the bits of different personalities, and you will find that, for instance, here with the self-portrait exercise, we have George on the left, who did everything exactly how it's supposed to be done. I mean, I gave him instructions about how to fill the entire page with pieces of paper and glue them on and make outlines of the face and all that kind of thing. And yeah, on the other hand, the girl on the right used a very different approach. She never covered the entire page, and she did some other things that are kind of interesting too, but she had so much fun doing it. She enjoyed the process a lot, and she even finished it in her own time. So this is an example of where you would find that that person on the right, that girl, will not need those exact steps probably. And you will see her doing something else, and that's fine. But on the left, that person probably wanted to have a specific guidance each step of the way. What do I need to do next? What do I now do now? And we will have to give that to them. The second example is that in the topic of community, which included the self-portrait in the middle, Mia on the left has followed the instructions that I gave to the class to come up with some sort of frame around the portrait that symbolizes her community, her neighborhood that she was living in. And there was gangster shootings with a gun somewhere on the pictures and all these kind of things. On the right-hand side, Cassidy, she did the same class at the exact same time, but also you see already that her portrait is quite different from what Mia was doing. And she just wanted to do her own thing, as you could see, and it was just as good, and I was encouraging her to do that. And even her collage that she put around is quite different. She didn't tear up things, she didn't draw little pictures like I instructed them to do, but in a way it has come up with an amazing result at the same time as the other one. So I was glad she could express herself apart from not following the instruction, which was totally good. And the third example is on the topic of my path, which is a landscape drawing. Again, on the left-hand side, it was done according to instruction, with the profile of the face on the page in both of them. But on the right, you can see there's more freedom. He actually included eyes, and I never said anything about really drawing your face in there, but they wanted to do that, or he wanted to do that. It was a boy, I think. And it is amazing. The results are both wonderful, and I would encourage you to give them the freedom if they show that they're responsible with it. We have run the courses in garages, in storage rooms of prisons. Many times we had to compromise the ideal situation and the ideal classroom, and it was not always tidy and neat, but I would like to encourage you to really do your best to make a nice and positive environment, inspiring atmosphere for them. So at least we had our art supplies neatly given out or organized. But we also made sure, and especially that applies for the kids course and some teenagers too, that you always give them only what they need for that specific step. If you give them too much, you will find that they are messing around with things, that they're losing pens on the floor, and they're doing things they're not supposed to be doing, or that can actually destroy the picture altogether if they get too much into maybe the coloring or the felted pens or whatever at a too early stage. So yeah, again, you have to evaluate your classroom situation. I told you before that they can disobey the rules. Now I'm telling you they can't, but again, it depends on the students. You will see what each group will need. But I usually give them only what they need for the immediate step. All right, another feedback that we received from one of the students you saw earlier, it was a child that said, "I felt happy because you let us do it by ourselves." And we hope that you will enjoy observing your students as they use their own freedom within the boundaries given. So thanks for listening to this topic of freedom and boundaries.